Welcome back. South Africa is observing Disability Rights Awareness Month. Now, the theme for 2023 is Consolidate and Accelerate Rights of Persons with Disabilities into the Future. The month of November brings into focus the advancement of the rights of persons with disabilities. Now, for more on this conversation, we are joined by Professor Jill Hanass-Hancock, a senior specialist scientist at the South African Medical Research Council. Professor, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. Now, the National Policy on Disability has been developed to ensure that all people with physical challenges, whether they're poor, vulnerable or marginalized, receive adequate economic and social protection. How far are we in attaining these goals?
Okay. First of all, it's great that we have that policy. So that's something good to start with. And then maybe we need to look at how many people with disabilities there are and what our research and science shows. So overall, we have something around about 17 to 22% of our populations who experience some form of functional limitation. That's what we call it more from a scientific perspective. That we can also call disability, but when we would talk about people with more severe disabilities, around about 6%. And I make this difference on purpose because it does matter kind of what type of disability are we talking about and what degree of disability are we talking about. Is it someone with a more mild or moderate or severe disability? And depending on that, people are more or less left behind. So if I take just let's say the severity of disability, what we measure in our research, for instance, is we're looking at bigger data sets, and we look at something we call multidimensional poverty. And there we're looking at education, health, employment, and living conditions. And there we can see a gap. We call it a disability gap between people who have no disabilities, those who have more, we call it mild, moderate disabilities, so functional limitations, and then those people with this more severe functional limitation or severe disabilities. And the gap is growing when we're going between these degrees of disabilities. For instance, of those people with like more severe functional limitations, we have around about almost 50% of them experiencing multidimensional poverty in South Africa. So that's why I'm like saying it depends who we're looking at. It also depends which type of disability. Some are more disadvantaged than others.
So, Prof, now there's been a general reduction in studies that are done globally with regards to the plight of persons living with disabilities. However, South Africa ranks better in terms of such research. What are we doing differently?
I do think we still have quite a number of good researchers. So there are some research institutions in Stellenbosch, University of Cape Town, with Pretoria, and obviously here in Durban, where I'm coming from, where there's pockets of excellence, and we have where people develop an understanding about disability. We also have some groups of people that are working in the field and actually collect excellent data in order to improve their services to people with disabilities. We call them like good practices, maybe we want to say so. And also these people also produce data that is increasingly important to understand what works to reach people, let's say, for instance, in a rural area. That is much more difficult to serve than maybe an urban population.
So, I mean, Professor, speaking about this good data and collecting this good data, are we seeing this data informing decision-making around policy and advocacy in order for us to be able to see some strides that we are making with regards to improving the lives of people living with disabilities?
Slowly, yes. So, I just make one example. So, like, I have worked for a very long time in the space of HIV, TB, and STIs. So I've been active in the South African National AIDS Council. A lot of my work has supported the disability sector working in that space. And slowly, if you're looking at the development of our national strategic plans over the years, more and more disability references came into this plan. But until very recently, very little was implemented. So this seems to change with this new national strategic plan that we are having now. So I'm aware of that. The disability sector is able to implement some work that is relevant to them. And here again, science and advocacy work actually hand in hand. So groups of the groups or the sector of the disability sector there is choosing one particular tool that was developed to improve accessibility, inclusion, and healthcare services, and will implement that and deliver that. And that is something that is now in that strategic plan, for instance, and now is being implemented by the disability sector themselves, obviously through government.
And in your recent studies, what's your data currently showing you? What's standing out the most in terms of what you're finding?
I think we still have quite a big gap in terms of catching up to understand how we make health services overall inclusive and accessible to persons with disabilities. We could also speak about poverty or employment, but I'm in the space of health. So, I mean, first of all, people with disabilities have around about like a 20-year life expectancy gap in South Africa compared to people without disabilities. So there's a lot to catch up, clearly. So, and we need to find ways of working with the challenges that people with disabilities experience. So first of all, they may actually have increased healthcare needs because of a functional limitation, a health condition that they have. They might be increased vulnerable to specific health conditions. So, for instance, we will know that a particular woman with disabilities twice as likely to be at risk to be infected with HIV. They're also twice as likely to be exposed to gender-based violence than women without disabilities. So sometimes there's an increased risk. And then, as I've already mentioned, healthcare services have to be accessible. So can a person with disability get to the health facility is the first question. Is there transport that is accessible to them? But that may be specifically an issue for someone using a wheelchair, but also someone who's blind or who is deaf may need another assistant. The cost may be double. When you come to the clinic, can you get into the clinic? Is there a ramp? Is there a railing? Are there is there contrast used inside the clinic? Is that friendly? Are people understanding me? If I need sign language, is someone there to speak at? Do people understand the condition I have? Is there a simplified way of explaining something to me if I have an intellectual disability? And then, very important, are there rehabilitation and disability services that I need? Can I get assistive devices? What about the rehabilitation that I may need? So all of those are questions that we haven't well answered yet. We have these pockets of excellence, but these are small pockets. These are not yet mainstreamed into our primary healthcare system, and that is what needs to happen.
Most certainly, Prof. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and of course, many have said that there are so many policies that are in place and very little implementation, and we certainly hope that some of the research that you do will contribute towards those implementation processes. Thank you so much. That was Professor Jill Hanass-Hancock, a senior specialist at the South African Medical Research Council.